Welcome. I'm Francine Chittenden. I'm the treasurer of the Friends of Waterbury Reservoir, and we're sharing a screen with Eric Chittenden, who is the president, and Michael Bard, who's also on our board. I'm going to turn this over to Eric. As people log in, you were muted originally when you first came in. We're going to ask that you stay muted just to prevent a little chaos from happening. And I think people are very interested in what our speakers have to say. So I'm going to turn this over to Eric.
Yeah, so Mike and I are taking notes, so we'll be the secretaries again.
You may want to say that if people do want to speak, they should use the raise their hand.
Yes, you could, if you want to speak, you can raise your hand and I'll recognize you.
The other thing is if you have comments or questions, just put them into the chat box, and Sheila, who's our vice president, will also be keeping track of that. And if we have time at the end of the meeting, we'll try to get back to some of those if they're not answered by the speaker.
Okay. Well, I'd like to start out the thing with kind of recapping some of the stuff that's we've been doing. I'm going to hold this up for you because that's the thermometer. We could take a victory lap here. I called the town clerk, Carla, and she said that it looks like we've got enough signatures to even cover what she expects might be some she'd have to throw out. So we still have time to get them if that's not the case, but we got about 255 signatures right now. She said that we needed 230 down from the 250 because it's 5% of 4,600 registered voters. So I'm going to just very briefly go over a few things here. Some of the things we did this year. We did some small things, business cards and so on. This was the 6th year of our greeter program. And Zach, I think you've been there for all of them, haven't you?
Yes.
And we came out with some great swimming posters, thanks to Charlotte Bryn. The fish line bins. Emma did an incredible map. And we did a Rotary presentation. They did the 4th of July parade. So we had a lot of items on the menu this year, and it's been very, very busy, and I think we've been pretty productive. So I'm going to leave it at that, and we'll keep moving. Is Benjamin Green here?
Yes, he is.
Good morning. Good evening, Benjamin.
Good evening.
So I think you can just go ahead. We had some questions, as you know, and I forwarded you a couple of them. And I'll just let you take over.
Sure, I have a brief presentation, if that's okay, just some talking
Great.
points.
Perfect.
Let me see if I can share this thing. All right, does that show up on everyone's screen as a aerial image of the spillway at Waterbury?
Absolutely.
All right, well, thanks a lot for having me. Ben Green, Chief Dam Safety Engineer for the state of Vermont. Just invited here to provide a brief update on the spillway project at the dam. And this is an aerial image of the dam taken last week from a drone. So stuff's happening out there. So I want to give a real brief background of the project and kind of how we got where we are. And this first is a website link. We have a project website specifically for this project.
You sure you don't want to listen?
I don't think so, Bob.
And we provide major updates at that location, so that's a good website to keep track of. I don't think it's been updated since July, but there's been no major milestones since then. And just to kind of step back in time and just kind of give you some background on how we got here. Back in the early 2000s, during the seepage remediation project that was going on at the dam, during a normal test operation of the spillway gates, the gates jammed in a partially open position. It was determined by the Army Corps of Engineers at that time that the deteriorated condition of the concrete was causing swelling of the concrete, which was lessening the tolerances in the gate bays and caused the jamming. The gates were skinned down at that time to make them operational again. But that's what kind of started this whole thing in motion. Shortly following that, the Army Corps of Engineers did a structural assessment on the gates and found that they were structurally deficient to safely hold back the entire flood load that the dam was originally designed for. So flood load restrictions were placed on the dam, on the gates. Kind of moving forward a little bit, Green Mountain Power, who owns and operates the hydropower plant at the base of the dam, renewed their Federal Energy Regulatory Commission license around 2016. As part of that came a water quality certification that many of you are probably aware of that indicated that in the long term that reservoir drawdowns would be eliminated for water quality and ecological benefits. But in the short term, they could remain until these the spillway gates are addressed. So kind of sets the stage. For many years, state and federal legislators have been trying to work to find funding for this project, and kind of at last, through the WIN Act of 2016, funding was identified. And largely, the state has teamed with the Army Corps of Engineers, who's providing technical guidance for the project and also a healthy cow share. So project steps, where we've been and where we're going. The first step, which is completed, is the risk assessment. Risk assessment was performed largely last year into a little bit of this year. It was basically a holistic look of the entirety of the dam. We certainly understand we have these deficiencies at the spillway, but the risk assessment was to take a step back and look to see if there's any other deficiencies at the dam that were of a similar risk and consequence level to the deficiencies at the spillway. So that task has been completed, and now we're moving on to the dam safety modification study. And these are kind of standard Army Corps of Engineer project milestones. Dam safety modification study is basically meant to identify data gaps in the risk assessment and sort of fill those and provide engineering support for the eventual design and construction. You can see on here, we have design occurring kind of estimated in the 2023 to 2024 timeframe, and construction in the 2024 to 2027 timeframe. So we're still a ways out, and these timeframes are estimated because they're based on a lot of unknown factors at this point. Again, the final remediation isn't even identified yet. The design is not done, of course, so we don't really have a great sense for these. These are just a rough sense for what the dates are going to look like. And we'll know a lot more as we move forward. I want to take a couple of minutes and just talk a little bit about the probable failure modes that were identified as part of the risk assessment. This will kind of just give you a sense for the entirety of the project. As part of the risk assessment, we identified 50 probable failure modes, or basically weak points associated with the dam. And after those 50 were identified, it basically was eliminated down to, or reduced down to 4 that were truly like risk driving or major concern type failure modes of the dam. So the first that was identified was embankment overtopping, which is a very low probability of happening event because we need a very major flood for it to happen. But sort of the wild card here is the potential debris load in the drainage area that could cause spillway blockage and actually cause this event to occur under a slightly smaller flood than previously thought. This failure mode is probably going to be addressed in the final project by the installation of a robust boat and debris barrier out in front of the spillways. Another failure mode that has been discussed and is being studied is seepage causing erosion of the foundation. Despite all this efforts that have gone into this dam to remediate seepage issues, the complex and unusual geology lends the experts to believe that there's still a potential weak points associated with those elements of the dam. Probably the way that this probable failure mode is going to be addressed is the addition of some targeted instrumentation to allow for easy and early identification of this potential mode. And then kind of moving on to the more obvious ones associated with the spillway. Spillway Tanner gate failure or this instability associated with the ungated section of the spillway. So these two are obviously the main subjects of the project, and turned out to be kind of what we hope to find out from the risk assessment, that these are really the risk driving failure modes. To address these failure modes during the dam safety modification study next spring, the Army Corps will be on site to do rock and concrete coring to collect samples and data regarding the material properties to help hone in the structural analysis of concrete elements. And we're working right now on potentially installing structural health monitoring instrumentation on the gates to help refine those structural models as well, to help with the assessment and design.
Hey, good evening, Bill.
So that's kind of where we are right now. The overall goals of the project are to restore full flood control capability to the dam, continue to support the historic uses, hydropower and recreation. Ultimately, it's going to lead to the end of the seasonal drawdowns, which should hopefully improve water quality and ecology in the lake, and then also, improve operation and maintenance and public safety associated with the dam. So that's pretty much my whole little presentation I had put together here, and I did get some questions in writing before the talk, and I think I kind of tried to work the answers in. I think I've got most of them, with the exception of there was a question about how the work might impact the old CCC areas. And to answer that one, I would say right now, I'd say that's a bit undetermined. I would suspect that there would really be no impact.
Safety engineer.
I'm sorry. I would suspect there'd be no impact to the CCC areas located south of Little River Road, but I would anticipate the potential for impact to the terrace area below the western side of the dam. That field area kind of below the dam will probably be repurposed once again as a construction staging area. So I would anticipate some disturbance there, but certainly a little early to tell. Like I said, since we don't even fully know what our remediation strategy is yet. Is there any other questions that I can answer? Well, if not, I'm happy to. I have my email and phone number here. If you have questions, feel free to contact or write me anytime. And thanks for inviting me to present.
Thank you, Ben. And if people do get in touch with us afterwards, we'll be sure to forward any questions to you. We can act as a little bit of a liaison between folks that might think of questions after the fact.
Sure.
And so,
Glad to answer any.
Benjamin, a couple of folks asked about whether or not they're concerned about whether it's going to get drawn down. There's no determination on that at this point, is there?
Yeah, it's kind of too early to know on that. I would suspect there's going to be some level of drawdown. It's just, we're going to be working on the spillway, one of the main way to convey water through the dam. So I think there's going to be some level of drawdown, but the duration and magnitude is just unknown at this point.
Okay. Well, listen, thank you very, very much. Anybody else have any questions? Okay. Well, thank you very much, Benjamin.
Leave meeting.
Thank you.
I'm not sure I got it to him on time.
Okay, Francine.
Oh, I'm doing the finance meeting, finance report. There we go, sorry. Okay. We'll go on to the next agenda item. It's the finance report. This should be fairly quick. As you know, we're a fairly small organization. Currently, we are meeting our obligations. We have our largest expense. We've pretty much gone through the year with most of our expenses. We're hoping to have some donations flow in towards the end of the year to help some of our cash flow issues. Our largest piece of what we sponsor is our greeter program. This year, our total costs, which includes salary, taxes, workers' comp insurance for running the program, is $3,733.80. There might be a little bit more in there with some more state tax payments, but that's pretty much it. We have a few other expenses that we have met. We have the expense of starting a Zoom account, which was it was about $160. We had some fundraising costs, which came to $356, and we also have to carry general liability insurance, $664. So our total operating costs, which includes some postage as well, is $1,319.92. We have received in direct public support a little over $1,900, and that would be in donations. We also have received some grant money from both the town of Stowe and the town of Waterbury. We are still waiting. A lot of our greater program monies come from the Agency of Natural Resources in Vermont, and we are still waiting for payments from them. So hopefully we'll see another $3,000 in our coffers before the end of the year. So currently, we're financially okay. I don't know if you have any questions or any thoughts about it. Again, we're small. Our budget is really not much more than $5,000 or $6,000 a year, so it's pretty easy to calculate and easy to track.
So do we need to make a motion to approve this, Francine?
I'm told we do, so if we could have.
All right. I move we accept the finance report as presented by Francine.
Okay.
I need a second.
Second it.
Thank you.
Walter, second it. Okay.
And this is the board speaking, and all in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Okay, thank you. Any questions concerning our finances, please feel free to call me or drop me an email. I can tell you what's going on. Thank you.
Okay,
Again.
we're ready for Zach to give us a report of the summer greeter program. Go for it, Zach.
Awesome. I'm Zach Johnston. I'm the greeter. This is both my 6th year and the 6th year of the greeter program. So I'll just give you a really quick rundown. So for those of you that don't know, our greeter program, what we do is we educate people about invasive species and what they can do with their boats, kayaks, canoes to help stop the spread from invasive species from other ponds and bodies of water to ours. So like I said, this is a 6th year we've done it, and got to speak with a ton of like awesome people. So yeah, the one invasive.
Uh-oh, did he freeze?
Rose up, bro.
Spread. So last year we had a record amount of people that we interacted with, over 800. And for those of you who are on the reservoir last year, it was kind of a crazy place. Everyone was out there. There wasn't, a ton to do in the middle of the pandemic. And this year we had 531 interactions, which compared to the years before would be like really high. Like that's how much we had when we used to just have 2 greeters. Now we just had 1 greeter. So the reservoir has really become a super popular place. Some highlights this year. Like one funny one, the little things that count in life, is that we finally had a porta potty at the Blush Hill access, which we've never had. So that was, when you're out there for 8 hours, that's clutch. A couple of other highlights. Well, one thing was almost every holiday we had this year, the weather was not great for. So like Memorial Day, it was gray and kind of rainy, and 4th of July this year we only had like 25 interactions, and normally there's like over 100 people there. And Labor Day was kind of the same, but on Labor Day we got this really cool rainbow right across the res, so that was really awesome. But yeah, that was oh, one last thing too. We also at the dam launch this year, we did get a extra parking area. That parking kind of is always the big headache. So that made it a little bit easier, but that like continues to be the biggest stressor with it. But yeah, that was our greeter program this year, and it was another success. And hopefully next year we'll have more greeters so we can cover more area. Because this year it was just me. And we went all the way into September this year, which was another really cool thing, because in the past we've stopped at Labor Day, And those few weeks after Labor Day, the weather was really nice, and those were some of we had some like pretty busy weekends. The last weekend I was out there was last weekend in September, and we had more people that weekend than we did 4th of July weekend. So, but yeah, that's pretty much what I have. If anyone has any questions.
Zach, I wanted to ask you, every time I went over the new parking lot, I saw very few, if any, cars there most of the time. Did it actually get used?
It did like later in the day. One of the big issues with that parking lot that I found personally, is that you have to walk in that very narrow road to get to the boat launch. So it would be great to figure out a way to get some kind of path, because I think that's one of the things that causes people to just park on the side of the road instead. Because it's a further way to walk, and it is a little hairy.
Zach, a few people wanted to know if there was a particular invasive species that you were concerned about, or one that you actually found this year that was a particular concern.
So the one that we have is Brittle Naiad. And this year, normally we've found other invasives. This year was mostly Brittle Naiad. Curly leaf pondweed is one that we've often found in the past, and of course, Eurasian milfoil is like the big one that we're always trying to keep out. But yeah, there's a lot of different ones, and Champlain is the place that like has the most invasive. So whenever we have a boat coming from there, that's definitely one we try to give a good look at. But for the most part, like it's all about education, because we want to teach people to look for invasives, because we're only out there like once a week. So we only look at so many of the boats that go on the body of water.
Okay.
Anything else?
I think, well, that's great, Zach.
Awesome, thank you.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
So, if you can't think of anything else, thank you very much for the presentation, Zachary, and we're gonna see you next summer.
So
You'll put them on the spot.
Now, come on, Zach.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you
Zach.
so much. So Sheila, you wanna talk about the fishing line?
Sure,
Line bins?
Sure.
Okay.
I'll talk about the fishing line. This year, we got permission from state parks to start a pilot project for monofilament fishing line recycling bins. And if you have been to Cottonbrook, you may have seen them. There's also one at Blush Hill and one at the state park. We have a little PowerPoint that we were showing before our meeting tonight. We can show it again at the end, which shows how they were installed, what they look like, what we find in them. But the origins of this project is, for the past few years while paddling, I personally have found, not just at Waterbury Reservoir, but at Waterbury Reservoir, especially at the Cottonbrook end, lots of discarded fishing line, tackle, bobbers, whatever. And I've been collecting it for the past few years. And again, not just from Waterbury, but I paddle about 50 different lakes every year, and I'm out every day. So I'm finding stuff all over the place. And I start off the season with an empty tackle box. And this is this year's collection of stuff that I found. And what drew my attention to this is, as a volunteer with the Vermont Center for Eco Studies Loon Project, I've read for years reports, not just in Vermont, but in the Adirondacks and in New Hampshire, of loons and other wildlife getting entangled in discarded fishing tackle, fishing line that's left on branches, and many birds have actually died as a result of this entanglement. And it came close to home last summer when Ranger Chad had to rescue a cormorant that was entangled in fishing line. Now, granted, cormorants are not everyone's favorite bird, but no bird deserves to starve to death with its bill wrapped in fishing line. So being aware of this, and the fact that Boat USA has a program to provide plans for monofilament fishing line recycling bins, Eric Chittenden and I started looking into it. And we looked at the standard design from Boat US, which is fine, basically a PVC pipe with an elbow at the top. And the idea is that fishermen or anyone that finds discarded fishing line puts it in there instead of just leaving it on the shoreline or throwing it in the water or as bird's nest in the tree. And then that filament line can get recycled, because you don't want to just throw it in the trash either, because at a landfill, we all know how birds are attracted to landfills and garbage dumps and places like that. It still presents a hazard to birds and wildlife. So as I say, we got permission from the state parks as a pilot project, and we put the 3 up, and we kind of went fancy on ours. We had to paint them dark green to meet the state requirements. And Eric designed an alternative top to prevent trash from being deposited in them, because the big fear, both from us as an organization and from state parks, was that people would use these as trash receptacles, which has been a problem in other states such as Connecticut, which has hundreds and hundreds of these bins. So we agreed to monitor them on a regular basis. I'll post, we have an end of year report, kind of a nice narrative report, and I will post it on our Facebook page, and we'll get it on our website as well. But in essence, we are considering the program a success. We found very little trash, only 1 poop bag, which is amazing, and lots of fishing line. And though fishing line is the targeted item that we're trying to get recycled, finding bobbers, leaders, lures, hooks, that doesn't really offend us, because that's getting them away from the shoreline and from the water, where they're going to present a hazard to the birds and to the shoreline mammals as well. So that's our project, and we've just got approval from the state to expand it next year, so that we should have the recycling bins at the dam access and also at the Little River State Park boat access that they have for the campers and any day use users there. So again, for more information on this, we'll be posting our report on our social media, Facebook, and also on our website. That's it.
Go ahead.
So
Voila.
I'd say that another verification of the success of it, I mean, I personally went into this with a bit of skepticism. I just wasn't familiar with them. But very soon I realized that the fishermen actually were appreciating them and using them. But on top of that, at the end of the season, when we gave our reports to Susan Bomer, at some point she asked us for the plans for it, and with the idea that some other lakes might want it, or maybe the state itself may do something with using them more. In some parts of the country, they're heavily used. I think western Mississippi, it's almost everywhere, and down south in all the states. Vermont has not had a lot of use of these bins, but that might be changing.
Okay. So next on the agenda, I think, is
So
the
the next
Loon
is
Nest.
the Loon Nest, and
Oh.
you want to talk about
Me again,
that?
yeah.
Yes.
This will be quick. Again, in 2019, we had nesting loons for the first time on Waterbury Reservoir up at the Cottonbrook end. Unfortunately, as often happens, we get high water events and their nest was flooded out. But in order to encourage them to nest, we worked with Vermont Center for Eco Studies, and in the late summer of 2019, even though it was after nesting season, we built a loon raft because the loons were still around, and that way the loons could get used to the idea that here's a nice little island, because loons like to nest on our little islands. And by making an artificial little island, the water level can go up and down, but the nest doesn't get flooded. So they didn't use it in 2020. I have photos of them swimming around the signs that say loon nest area, stay out. They were slaloming around the signs, but they didn't nest. But we set it out again this year, hoping, in pretty much the same area. And in June, probably 50 yards from where we set up the loon nest, I saw the 2 loons mating on their own little section that they decided they liked better than our loon nest. So Chad went out nicely enough and moved the loon nest raft closer to where the loons had been mating, because they'll often mate close to where they're going to nest. No, they decided they weren't quite ready to set up housekeeping yet. So, but they are around. I saw an adult loon just yesterday, swimming on the loon, probably a transitionary one, working its way towards the coast, but they're around. And so we'll be out again in the spring, setting up the loon raft nest again, and hoping that maybe for the first time ever, we can actually, even if they don't hatch chicks, maybe we can at least get them to successfully lay a pair of eggs. So we're still working on that, and we couldn't do it without help from Vermont Center for Eco Studies and Eric Hansen, who's a great support, and Chad Ummel, of course, who's out there with the powerboat, who can do a lot of the heavy pulling and dragging and lifting for us when we get the nest in spot. So that's the loon project. We're still working on it.
Oh, thanks, Sheila. And our next item on the agenda here is the Safe Swimming Initiative. This was given a nice boost by our board member, Charlotte Bryn, who was on the board for about 6 months, and she had a lot of international things that she was doing. She's a famous swimmer, long distance swimmer, so she asked to be released from being a board member, and so we have only 8 board members now, and we'll be looking for the 9th. But the swimming, I've heard from 2 people, both fishermen, who appreciated the work that was put into that. And Francine's my brother-in-law, said that he saw some swimmers out there with the balloons and the color, basically a lot of color on them, and that they were much more noticeable than just a swimmer in the water. So we have some nice posters that were made up as a result of the input from Charlotte, and I think they're on the kiosks, aren't they, some of them?
Yep. They were.
Yeah, they're on the kiosks. So that was a new thing this year. And that's about all I have to report on that.
Mike. Okay, I'm going to switch over to Mike.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to keep this relatively short. This was a okay year in terms of fishing. I think we saw a lot of very high temperatures, which drove the trout down. The smallmouth weren't nearly as active. Fishing results were mixed. People who were good fishermen were catching fish. Some people were kind of complaining. But the big issue that I think I'm hearing is with fishermen, and I think everyone kind of involved, is the issues of mixed use and being good neighbors and stuff like that. Sometimes we're seeing that folks are not being the best neighbors in the world. You know, when you have high-speed boats going down the middle of the reservoir, and you see, you know, a group of 5 kayaks, you know, in narrow areas extending right across the way, that does create conflicts. And it's just, I know I have sat and tried to educate people. It's not, you know, I have 2 canoes and 3 kayaks, so I'm very sensitive to the needs of canoeists and kayakers, and also I guess the stand-up paddle boarders, which are becoming more popular. But I think those conflicts are becoming more of an issue, and I think we just need to educate and talk to people and say, hey, it would be good, especially if you're a quiet user, maybe to be more off on the side. Just the only time you should be right dead in the middle is when you're crossing the reservoir. It's just being a good neighbor. The other issue that's probably the biggest issue, and it's an issue at all of the accesses, is we're lucky that Waterbury is starting to be used more and more heavily, and with that use creates a lot of conflict at the accesses. There's a number of people who, people are probably not doing the best parking job in the world, and you know, we're seeing more and more use You know, like in Blush Hill, we're seeing on a crowded weekend, people are up beyond Michigan Avenue parking. And maybe to me, I think there might be a way, especially with boats, with trailers, some more compact design or designate spots specifically for trailers. So personal cars, can do different things. You could drop people off, but it's hard to, with a trailer, you can't just drop your trailer off. And there are very limited spaces if you are handicapped, especially with a trailer, to be able to, you may have to walk a significant distance. And I know I have heard from a few people that some people aren't going because they can't park reasonably close and they have some mobility issues. This has been somewhat addressed. I know I've spoken with Chad, and I think, in general, I think we need to, I'm also a selectman in town. It's something of a concern, the parking. One thing that was good is we banned parking on one side of the Blush Hill access to create better use for emergency vehicles, but that's also created a problem because people are having to park such a far distance away. And to me, the real solution is on all the accesses, we probably need more parking to be developed. And that's something we have to work with Forest Parks and Recreation. That's everything, unless anyone has any questions.
Looks like a few questions out there.
Well, I would say that,
Hang on.
am I muted?
No, I just want to see what the question.
Okay. One of the things that we're still getting a lot of comments on is especially the Blush Hill area and the traffic. There's no question that there's a lot of concern up there. People walking their dogs are frustrated because cars are parked on one side of the road, traffic on the other side, and they're limited to a very narrow area and concerned about their dogs getting hit. So we get those emails, and it's something that at some point will probably have to be addressed.
I think, Eric, also that we've tried to, make people understand that we're just a board of volunteers, and we have absolutely zero control over what happens on the road, which is a town road. We have zero control over what happens at the access areas. We will serve as a liaison between people's comments, complaints, concerns, attaboys, what have you, and pass them on to the appropriate parties. And if the town or if state parks asks us for advice or suggestions or what we think about something, we will offer that based on what we hear from the folks that follow us and our members. So we understand, as Eric says and as Mike says, these are complaints we've heard multiple times. Another one that's come up related to that is in terms of, people, Mike mentioned, for folks with disabilities or limiting mobility issues, not being able to use Blush Hill, or I don't know about the state park, but just regular folks that live locally are having issues that when the place is so busy that they just can't access it. And again, that's unfortunately, we may be a victim of our own success in terms of having such a beautiful resource that's so easily accessible from the interstate north-south and from Route 100 north and south. The other issue that there've been, I think, one comment by email and then also on chat is the issue of very large power boats on the reservoir. And I don't know much. I'll admit, Mike probably could answer better to this, and others too. I don't know much about power boats. I do know that New Hampshire Lakes, for example, has just completed a study on the effect of wakes on shoreline, wakes caused by boats on shoreline erosion, specifically on the high speed, I don't know what it's called, wake surfing kind of boats that are high powered and are designed to create a large surfing wake following the boat. and that New Hampshire Lakes Association is taking a stand and is submitting legislation to somehow, I don't know exactly, limit or restrict, just because of the damage that the large boats cause to shoreline. And anyone that's been out on the reservoir, whether you're paddling around or you're motoring around the shoreline, has seen some of the effects of erosion on the reservoir. So again, I don't know that we have any answers, but we certainly will, you know, take these comments and chat comments into our consolidation of what we hear from this meeting.
On some of your comments, I agree with you, and again, boats are really designed to be out in the middle where the wakes are kind of dispersed. So that's like where my comment about with when, you know, you see a flotilla of 6, 7 kayaks in a row in the middle and the boats have to go kind of around them, that's harming them. Plus there are all kinds of different, you know, it doesn't make a difference, different boats. You know, you look at, you could have a 21-foot bass boat that goes very successfully at 60, 70 miles an hour. That boat, when it goes 10 miles an hour, kicks up a lot more wake than when it's going at plane. So there are kind of issues, and you are right, those wake boats do create, that's what they're designed for, is to create a big wake. I just kind of have, it's something that we all have to figure out how we all have to live together, because Waterbury, I had, you know, I'll be the first one to say, is a perfect multiple use area. What, you know, someone with a kayak, there are a lot of places that you could get in with a kayak or a canoe where you can't get in with boats. So, you know, that's going to be a tough issue. Outside of Lake Champlain, Waterbury is really the first big body of water where people can go with speedboats, water ski boats, etc. There aren't that many, so it does create, as much as someone locally may want to canoe, kayak, you know, paddleboard, etc. If, you know, it's not just an issue of maybe what size boat it is. It's, you know, all just being, I think it's all being good stewards and trying to work with each other. Thanks.
It's a good segue to Chad, I think.
So Chad, are you still here, Chad?
I am. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, great. Well, looking forward to what you have. Quite a year out there.
Has been. Allow me to share my screen here. I'll get started with
Mhm.
Looks like your email. There.
Yeah.
There we are. Well, I must confess, I've been fielding several emails from folks around town who have had difficulty joining this meeting. They're receiving error messages. So I've been trying to send them the link. Ben Fulton, my assistant ranger, apparently was able to get in. He gave me the link. I was unable to join you early as well. So regrettably, there might be some folks that are missing out tonight. But if you can hear me and see me, I'll happily talk about one of my favorite subjects in the world, the Waterbury Reservoir. So thanks for having me back. This is my 6th year as the head ranger, finishing the season on the Waterbury Reservoir. As always, I thank the Friends of Waterbury Reservoir for allowing me this opportunity to just go over some of the highlights and challenges of the previous season. Here we are. For the few people that likely aren't quite as oriented with the reservoir, I threw up this map just to give you some reference. As you can see here, we have approximately 30 remote campsites, all accessible only by boat, a splattering of day use areas scattered around the reservoir as well, marked by triangles. So there has been a lot of discussion about the multi-use of the Waterbury Reservoir. This is indeed one of our concerns. The Waterbury Reservoir is one of the top 10 largest bodies of water in Vermont. There are several much larger, but we are in the top 10. Of course, for those who don't know, it was built in 1927 as part of a flood control project. We represent about 900 acres, depending on the current water level, with some 15 miles of undeveloped shoreline. We had a pretty good season out there, a lot of pretty events, a lot of nice visitors, including squirrels once more swimming across the reservoir seeking greener pastures. People have been rather delicately asking me how this season went. And I think that they're being delicate because everyone that was about knows how horrible 2020 was on the reservoir. It was overcrowded, it was abused, it was heavily utilized. We were the perfect destination in the middle of the pandemic where the doctor's orders simply was stay away from people, get outdoors. The Waterbury Reservoir remote site specifically really filled that bill. So this year things have been much, much better for a variety of reasons. Even the weather was much more cooperative, as Zach had alluded to earlier. Even our traditional holiday weekends of peak usage were tempered a great deal by damp weather. Additionally, the pandemic's effect began to wane a bit. We didn't feel the same intensity. So because of that pandemic's effect on the reservation system, rather than because we didn't have a reservation system, the pandemic required that we make a change. We have been doing first come, first serve on these remote campsites for some time now. There has been discussion for some time about moving to a reservation system, but again, the pandemic just forced our hand. Last year, there was theft of campsites, theft of gear. There were people selling campsites online. There were private reservations set up on Google Docs, as you have all heard of. So we did have to make a response. So for the first time in the history of the Waterbury Reservoir's remote sites, we implemented a reservation system. It was largely in keeping with other Vermont state parks that utilized the same online reservation system. The basic tenets of this new system were that all reservations must be made online or via telephone and at least 24 hours in advance. There were no same-day reservations allowed. For this very first year, it was understood that there would be no fees charged, so the camping at the sites remained free. However, there was an $8 per reservation fee. Basically, it was a transaction fee for the website that third-party host our reservations. So there's an $8 fee this first summer of reservations, whether it was a one-night reservation or up to a 7-day reservation. It was an $8 fee, regardless of how many people in your party. Also for this year, any campsite that hadn't been marked as reserved was still available for first come, first serve. You can see in the photo there, the reserve sign. Many of you have paddled or boated about the reservoir use this new system. It's quite elemental that every morning my staff or I would go around and we would mark the campsite as it was reserved or if it was vacant. It's a very simple, easy system. Folks would then, after they made their online reservation, arrive. They would have check-in and check-out times. As one of the advantages of this new system is that we now were actually able to do check-in and check-out times, whereas in the past, with the first come, first serve, we never knew when one party had left and another had arrived. Everyone has a green canoe. Sometimes the same green canoe seemed to be at a campsite for 21 days, and it was actually 4 different groups of green canoes that we couldn't keep track of. The check-in, check-out times also really helps better protect the resource. It allows us to visit the campsite in between each camper to assess for any possible damage, to make sure that it's clean and prepared for the next campers. It also gives the campsites themselves a rest, lets the wildlife peek their heads back out, even lets the composting toilets do a little decomposing during that quiet time in between. Whereas in the past, as you've seen, our remote campsites without a check-in and check-out time had near constant human occupation, always somebody there. So that was one of the big advantages, as I saw it, to the reservation system. It also allowed fair access to all. The first come, first serve system of the past was essentially a race. The first person to get to that campsite that was vacant could claim it, and paddlers simply couldn't compete. So that's one of the things that I really enjoyed seeing, is that now this reservation system, it is much more fair. When the campers arrived this year, because of the reservation system, they were far more prepared. In the past, some folks would just send out a scouting party with one individual and the fastest boat they had just to try to secure a campsite. Now they arrived more leisurely, knowing where they were going to be, that they had this particular campsite, number 7, for instance, for 2 nights. They were prepared for that campsite. Basically, they arrived much more chill. than in the past. They weren't frazzled. They weren't at combat camping phase, as we used to call it. Another advantage of the reservation system simply gives us more accountability for the campsites. We now have their information. We now know who is supposed to be at that campsite. They treated them generally with more respect now that they have their full contact information listed with a state agency. Another advantage is that we were able to actually plan and schedule. We could look ahead at a coming weekend and see how many campsites had been reserved. It helped us protect the resource better by simply letting us know what we need to prepare for that coming weekend. There were some challenges, quite admittedly, with this new reservation system. One of the greatest is that our policies in this first year differed from other state parks, and that caused a great deal of confusion. Many of the campers on the Waterbury Reservoir also camp at Green River Reservoir and Little River State Park and Elmore State Park, and the fact that our rules were different was confusing. It resulted in a lot of headache. Among those differences simply is that most parks required a 2-night minimum. We only had a 1-night minimum, but that was not so easily found and learned in the reservation system because it was different from everyone else. The biggest policy difference we noticed of the issue is that for this first year at the Waterbury Reservoir remote sites, we allowed reservations to be made only for the current month. So for instance, as you probably all know, for the month of July, you could only make reservations for the month of July in July. You couldn't book into August until the first business day at 9 a.m., which is completely different from all other parks and did result in a lot of headache. First off, people refer to that as that 9 a.m. on the first business day, like waiting in line for concert tickets or going online. It was really intense, and folks that were camped on the reservoir on the first at 9 a.m. missed out because they simply were sold out before they had a chance to get back to the system. So that current month system was different from other parks, presented some challenges. No shows and cancellations. And here's one that's still difficult for us to fully assess. When we compare our usage to other parks that also have a reservation system, every park has no shows. Every park has folks that book a campsite, simply don't show up. They change their mind. Life gets in the way. Sometimes they'll book a 3-night stay and only show up for one of those 3 nights if the weather was inclement. The difference for us on the Waterbury Reservoir is how visible these no-shows are. Not many of you just drive through other Vermont State Park campgrounds to see how many campsites are idle, empty, knowing that that campground is fully booked. So I guess what I'm trying to relate here is that I'm learning every Vermont State Park, probably every campground in the country, has this issue with no-shows. On the reservoir, it's very visible as people pad around. They see that reserved sign on a coveted campsite on a beautiful night and no one's there. So there's one of the challenges that we are facing statewide and looking at some possible solutions. Another challenge presented for us with the new reservation system was simply people hanging out at a reserved campsite. So I listed here as day users that were utilizing reserved campsites. So we'd go around in the morning, we'd clean a campsite, as we call it, to make sure that it's free of debris, that the toilet's ready to receive the next group, that there's no ash in the fire ring. Check-in time starts at 2. So the incoming group isn't allowed to even arrive until 2. Meanwhile, at noon, some folks show up and just innocently try to have lunch there. But that results in a great many problems, not only from them potentially leaving some litter behind. The next incoming group that had booked the reservation, and this fledgling reservation system had frequently paddled by and felt uncomfortable. They knew that they had booked that campsite, but there's a group of people hanging out there. And in some cases would go home to where they could then try to call me and find out what's going on. So that is one of our big problems, is people just hanging out at reserved campsites, which again doesn't happen in campgrounds. You don't drive into Elmore State Park and just sit inside one of their lean-tos when it's been reserved. So in response to that, we are looking to, and have already begun, not only opening more day use areas, but making them more inviting with picnic tables and established fire rings and better locations. So with the new reservation system, again, just getting through our first year, we do see some foreseeable changes based on recommendations from users, from staff, and just to keep us in line with other parks. It is very likely, although not certain, that camping fees will be applied next year. They will still be the same modest fees that you would pay at any Vermont state park. They're not going to be exorbitant. I don't know what they will be. That conversation is above my pay grade. They will be very comparable to the Green River Reservoir. It won't break your bank, but we're actually enthusiastically encouraging fees to be applied. We hope that that also will reduce in the amount of no-shows and lack of cancellations if people are actually invested a bit more, as it were. Another foreseeable change is that the reservation window will start matching all other state parks instead of that current month at a time, instead of that current month only 30 days out. It will likely move to the same 11 months out as other state parks. That will reduce the harried sensation on the first of each month. It will require people to plan a little bit farther ahead, but we also think it's going to make it more fair for people that aren't able to win the race on that single day on the first of each month. Now they'll have a bigger opportunity to find a campsite on the reservoir. We're also looking to find a way to streamline the check-in and check-out system. If you did camp on the reservoir this year, you know that your check-in time was at 2 o'clock. We strongly encourage and ask people, both in posted rules and via correspondence, that when they arrive at their reserved campsite to text us. Text messages, as you know, on the reservoir are much more reliable than a voice signal. With 5 different boat launches, we can never keep track of who's arriving or when. So we ask people as soon as they arrive at their campsite to check us. That's when my staff or I will come by and we'll check you in, just as you would at a hotel or any other campsite. We'll go over the rules and we talk about proper protection of food from bears and how to gather down and dead and detached firewood only, leaving no trace. We had a great difficulty with people simply ignoring that. They would arrive, not ever let us know. We were constantly on patrol, just rolling all around the res looking for a newly arrived group, and then we'd have to check them and make sure that it was the group that had reserved the campsite. So the check-in, check-out system was a bit of a failure for us this year. We really want to implement some new system next year. Another possibility of a change is even more park staff to be present at the boat launches during those peak arrival times. We could maybe check people in at the Moscow Paddler's Access or at the Blush Hill Boat Launch on a Friday at 6 p.m. when we often have an influx of a lot of campers at once. People often forget that unlike Green River Reservoir or any other established campground, we don't have a single access point. We have 5, maybe more, depending on how people are accessing the reservoir. They come at all hours of day, so it's very difficult for us to get everybody checked in, make sure they're all in the right place. Because the reservation system is new, additionally, we're utilizing a new third-party system called Aspira. It's the same reservation system used in national parks and many other state parks around the country. But because in the Waterbury Reservoir, it's brand new to us and only 1 year old to the state. I can give you some figures, but we can't yet isolate too many trends because, again, it's all new. In the past, you know, the only statistics we were able to capture of people camping on the reservoir was me going around with a clipboard, often with a flashlight in the middle of the night, asking people to give me their information, how many nights they're going to stay, etc. I mean, their group. Now we have a much more formal, established digital record. So you can see here, basically, we were pretty busy. If we compile the numbers at what I like to call the hive of parks in Waterbury, that's Waterbury Reservoir, Waterbury Center State Park, Little River State Park. If you combine the campers and day users at all of those facilities, we had 97,500 visitors. That sounds like a lot, but then you look here at the fine print and you realize that we don't even count the day users that enter from Blush Hill, Waterbury Dam, Moscow, Elephant Rocks, and the other private shoreline. So as you might imagine, the number is much higher than that. These are just the registered users that are entering via state parks. Now, even though the reservation system did work fairly well, it did eliminate many problems that we had. Honestly, the biggest reduction in difficulties for me was illegal camping. In the past, with the first come, first served system, people would paddle around, they'd boat around. If they couldn't find a campsite that was vacant, they'd often just march into the woods and try to make their own campsite. The illegal camping was all but eliminated this year. That was a wonderful, wonderful advantage to the reservation system. Now, there are still going to be some problems anywhere you have people gathered in a forest. Now, with the reservation system, it did calm the beast considerably, but we still had some bad behavior. Chainsaws are probably my worst nightmare. Imagine someone that's trying to protect the forest. Chainsaws are strictly prohibited. Regrettably, we did have one that got away from us, and at remote campsite 21, you can see in the photo there, they cut a lot of trees. Fortunately, most of them were dead. None of them were down, so they did violate the law there. But chainsaws, we'll tell folks during our check-in spiel, if you hear a chainsaw, let us know, we'll come running. So sadly, we did have some tree damage. Additionally, in the bottom right there, I blame the bar in Burlington that lets people throw hatchets. Hatchet throwing is becoming a problem everywhere, and on the Waterbury Reservoir especially. People are bringing axes and they're throwing them at trees for target practice. Ben, my assistant ranger who's on here, found hatchets far back in the weeds where they had clearly missed the tree and then couldn't recover their hatchet. So that is something that we're really going to have to try to crack down on. But yeah, as you might know, there's a bar in Burlington and other major cities where you can pay to throw hatchets at targets, much like you would at a bowling alley. Some other difficulties we had this year, although again, far better than the previous years. We did have some individuals that were hiking down to campsites 3, 4, 5, and 6, which, as you know, are off of Greg Hill Road. We do our best to keep those trails concealed, brushed in. We do not maintain them. All of our remote campsites are boat access only, and that's one of the problems that we have. This gentleman was moving from campfire to campfire in the middle of the night looking for handouts. We regrettably had another vehicle break-in, nothing like last year where we had 7 cars broken into, but we did have 1 vehicle broken into overnight at the Blush Hill boat launch. It was a smash and grab job. They did get away with a wallet that belonged to one of my remote campers. So a lesson learned from all parties, obviously. Don't leave your valuables in the car. All trailheads and boat launches are vulnerable. And then here in the center right, we did have a pontoon boat speeding late at night through the no wake zone, and got his just desserts when he ran aground on the Delta and required a good deal of effort to get him back on the water. There has been a lot of conversation tonight already about multi-use, and I am well versed in the issues. Every year we do have different conflicts. We have different multi-sharing disagreements. Sometimes it's the water skiers who are upset because the paddlers are on their way. Sometimes it's the wake boats that are flipping over stand-up paddle boards. There's always going to be a sharing issue. I did receive an advanced question if there's a possibility of reducing the size of vessels allowed on the Waterbury Reservoir. And honestly, that truly would be the act of legislation. The rules that we currently operate under are under the Department of Environmental Conservation and Watershed Management Division. They're the ones that set these rules, not Forest Parks and Recreation. They do revisit these rulings periodically. They likely would receive public input, but that's not what our department does. I will observationally say that I don't believe there are many more big boats on the reservoir than there were in the past. There are big boats, certainly. There are some that likely might be a little too big for the reservoir, but generally they don't have a good time because they can only go so far before they hit a no wake zone or a shoreline. As Michael pointed out earlier, different boats operate under different speeds. The bass boat there in the top left, yeah, they move wicked fast, but they leave no wake. So it seems like they're zooming all around and maybe disrespectful of the tranquility of the reservoir, but they are hydroplaning above the water basically and leaving very little impact. The top right there is a Cuddy cruiser. That is among the larger vessels that we do see on the Waterbury Reservoir. Those V-shaped hull boats often have sleeping berths beneath. We do have a few folks that come out and they like to just anchor, and as of yet, no issues with them camping on their boat. Rarely do we have issues with a large boat like that creating other disturbances. We even have new vessels appearing daily. I'm not sure if any of you have seen in the bottom left, this is called an e-foil. It is a miraculous little device that I had to stop and chat at length with the first operator I've seen, but it is basically like the hydrofoils that they use behind wake boats. It's basically two surfboards connected by a fin. The bottom surfboard has a propeller that's battery powered, and you can see in his right hand he has a joystick that simply operates it. So it's quite miraculous to see, but again, there's no legislation around those types of vessels because they're so new. It's ever evolving. We have to share. We just, as Michael said, if not educate, inform, let everyone know that we're all out here to have a good time. And if one person's good time is detracting from so many others, then yeah, we'll need to make some changes. Another reason I had a great summer is that I am the Lone Ranger no more. I used to be called just that. For the first time in several years, they did give me a staff, and an outstanding one at that. Pictured here on the far right is Seamus Breslin. He was my lead attendant. To the left, and also joining us tonight in the Zoom meeting, is the new assistant ranger of the Waterbury Reservoir, Ben Fulton. Many of you have had opportunity to interact with each of these young men. We were very, very fortunate. Most state parks, if not all Vermont state parks, were shorthanded. As you've read with the employment shortages all around the country, seasonal staff were among the most affected. We were very fortunate that while other parks were experiencing shortages, my staffing increased 200%. These two young men took a quick love to the reservoir. They were extremely dedicated, very motivated. We had a lot of fun, and I hope that you'll see them again next year. Because we had a staff this year, we were able to undertake a great many more projects than we've ever been able to in the past. As you see here in just a quick montage of them paddling around the reservoir, Seamus was primarily using a rowboat to get to campsites, while Ben was operating the Boston Whaler. We even trained them in some forest fire fighting techniques. It is great to have them. Every park has to submit staff photos. Because I never had a staff before, I got a little bit carried away with our staff photos and decided to emulate some of our favorite films by recreating scenes from Jaws. Just to give you some indication, we were able to have a good time this season out in the Waterbury Reservoir, Ben, Seamus, and I. Ben and Seamus took it upon themselves to remove many, many truckloads of garbage. In the past, I simply haven't had the time, opportunity, or strength to get to all of the garbage and litter that's accumulated from flood events or just from wash-ins. So pictured here is just a few of the items. They even went for submerged shipwrecks and tires that were sunken and trapped under logs. The reservoir has never been cleaner, thanks to the efforts of those two guys. Alluded to the kiosk. So after I presented to you folks last year, we were able to install these informational kiosks at several strategic locations all around central Vermont, actually. You'll notice them at each of our boat launches. They're at the Anglers Trail under the dam. They're at the Stowe Pinnacle Trailhead. What's really neat about these informational kiosks now is that if you were to look at the larger image closely, you'll see that each of those are interchangeable panels to allow us to update just sections of information on these kiosks as needed. We can alter the content depending on the time of year even. We can change it from remote camping to ice fishing. These have been really well received. They are a much more welcoming and informative aspect to all of the recreational features in central Vermont. We are still awaiting the detailed large map that's going to be really eye-catching. It will encompass not only the Waterbury Reservoir, but all the surrounding trail system at Little River State Park and up near the Moscow Paddlers access and the Cotton Brook Road Trail. So it'll be a really all-inclusive map. You'll definitely want to keep your eye out for that. We'll hope to get that coming soon, maybe this winter. The launches and access points, the choke points of the Waterbury Reservoir. Obviously, there's already been a great deal of conversation about it tonight. I regret that they are such a sticking point. They are a difficult area. Everyone's eager to get to the water. Everyone's excited to go out and play. So these are, again, choke points. Once they're on the water, they can spread out. they all have been very bustling, nothing compared to last year. You recall during the pandemic's intense demand, these boat launches became real boxing rings. It was a lot of stress and a lot of angst. This year was far better, but there are still issues to address. We recognize that. It's the same multi-use sharing issue, and at any one of these boat launches or access points, you're going to have shore anglers and swimmers and paddlers and motorcraft. People you've probably seen just there for their lunch break, sitting in their cars, taking in the view. These access points are very, very popular. The significant improvements that we made to the dam, to the Blush Hill, and the Moscow Paddlers access, you recall in 2019, proved fortuitous. In 2019, all of those launches were improved, parking was improved and enhanced, and it couldn't have been better timing just before the pandemic. So while those boat launches all did recently receive those upgrades and enhancements, the state is still aware that there are some shortfalls. Zach was very astute in pointing out that at the Waterbury Dam, we just opened that overflow parking lot beneath the dam, as it were. It isn't heavily utilized, as he said, until late in the day when the others have filled up. The walk up the road can be treacherous. That is why the master recreation plan is calling for a sidewalk that's going to be behind wooden guardrails. So that's soon coming as well, part of the master recreation plan. All of these launches are continuing to receive improvement. Once that is in place, people will use that overflow parking lot, further reducing pressure on the Waterbury Dam launch. But again, I understand there's always concerns. The residents of Little River Road, they can't open their windows on hot days because of all of the traffic, the dust from cars and trucks that are headed to the dam. People who live on Greg Hill Road are plagued by the high volume of cars and litter from people that are going to Elephant Rock. I understand the residents of Blush Hill are worried about speeding. People that live on the Blush Hill Road are dealing with increased traffic. It is a problem that the state has recognized. The Blush Hill launch specifically is currently receiving feasibility studies, some wetland evaluations that are underway. Some design ideas are already being floated. The folks above me have said that sometime mid-winter, they'll likely be to the point where some of these design plans might be able to start going out for public input and meeting with town planners. So the state is aware. And of course, the Blush Hill boat launch specifically has so many vested parties, from the town to the Forest Parks and Rec to the residents, to make sure that that problem is alleviated. So yeah, I understand that it's a popular spot and people are going to keep coming. So it's good that there are steps being taken. Zach had kindly also spoken about the invasive species earlier. It's one of the greatest contributions of the Friends of Waterbury Reservoirs, their work to help prevent further invasive species in the res. Every year we map the known invasive species, primarily the Japanese knotweed, which is of course around the shoreline, while the brittle naiad is a submergent aquatic invasive. Just like Zach, I've always put on this map the Eurasian milfoil and invasive mollusks, prepared to map them when they arrive, but thank heavens so far none. Also previously mapped was the yellow flag iris. It is an invasive that we were able to eradicate. But generally the brittle naiad, marked there in yellow, which you probably have seen under the water in late summer, looks a bit like a rusty coral reef. It did spread less this year than since the landslide. It is still quite prevalent. It is a concern. The Japanese knotweed up above the water's edge did spread. It continues to spread slowly south. New patches were found this year by Ben at 15, remote site 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19. So if you look at the map closely there, it's the northeast corner, basically, of the reservoir where more knotweed is being noticed. Another big implement in addition for us this year, radio communications. You might recall last year during the pandemic, we had a great many issues that required law enforcement and medical personnel. For the first time, park staff now actually have radio communications. Most people were shocked to learn that we didn't. But with the Waterbury Reservoir's geographic shape, basically being a bowl surrounded by mountains, even ordinary walkie-talkies would not work. So now there's an antenna mounted atop Little River's ranger station. Each of our boats is equipped with either these portables or the CB style. So for the first time, now all of the parks in the Waterbury High, Little River State Park, Waterbury Center State Park, and those of us on the reservoir are able to communicate just for day-to-day and emergencies. So that is actually a really big addition to our abilities to manage the reservoir. I'm nearly finished here, folks, and I'll take some questions if I haven't been able to answer them yet. I wanted to recap the landslide. This was the biggest event to occur geologically in Vermont in many decades, about a century, and it happened right here above the reservoir. Here's a photo of the landslide as it looked in the year after the June 2019 event. The landslide remains technically active, but it's really starting to vegetate in a little bit on the edges there. Most of the action was still seen as after heavy rain events, and just a few trees from the edges will collapse inside. The geologists continue to monitor it. This is the overhead view of the delta where the Cotton Brook hit the reservoir after the landslide. All of that debris, silt, sand, and stone is the mountainside that washed into the reservoir. As many of you might recall, my first efforts to keep people off it were giant signs that said danger quicksand. I've learned a lot about my fellow Vermonters, and if you put up a sign that says quicksand, they're going to go play in the quicksand. So then we tried a sign that said danger active landslide area. That was a bit more effective, but finally this year, we were blessed to have very few high water events that re-flooded the area, and we implemented a new system of signs that simply say shoreline restoration, keep off fragile vegetation, and that worked. People did stay off, allowing the landslide to where it meets the reservoir here at the delta begin to vegetate. We found saplings, a great deal of ferns, spirea. So far, no invasive species. Ben took this photo this very afternoon after the only high water event we've had of 2021, and the vegetation is helping to stabilize it. So we're really excited that hopefully the reservoirs further rain events aren't going to result in the clouding of water, that this area might stabilize and just become part of the natural forest once more. So again, I thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I'm scrolling through, see if anybody had any questions.
Couple questions, Chad. I'll give them to you off the chat so you don't have to refer to that.
Thanks,
There were a
Sheila.
couple, I'll kind of combine a few together that had questions about the reservation system. One person said he's never been able to get a reservation. So he wondered if there was any chance that Vermonters could get sort of a head start before other people. And someone else in the same vein was saying that they prefer the monthly reservation system because they've never been able to get a site at Green River, which would be the 11-month system again.
Right.
So it has to do with access to the reservation system.
Yes, and first off, I feel badly for that individual who was unable to get a reservation. It was an intense race in the first business day of each month. If you were online at 9 a.m., you saw how quickly we sold out. On July 1st at 9 a.m., all of the weekends sold out in 6 seconds. All of the weekdays sold out within the next 2 minutes. It was incredibly intense. And what's worse is that another drawback to that monthly system as I see it is that many of the individuals that were on at 9 a.m. on the first of each month booked multiple reservations, whether they planned on using them or not, because I think it was a little bit of a panic buying moment when they realized, okay, we've got something, let's just keep going. And they kept booking campsites. So we saw the same names appear each month on campsites that were frequently never utilized.
I'll just add something there, Chad, that's not a unique situation, in that anyone who's tried to make reservations for Canada, Parks Canada, national parks in Canada, or national parks in the United States, the moment that the reservation system opens, it's the same thing. Within 5 minutes, everything's booked. So it isn't unique to Waterbury Reservoir or Green River Reservoir or any other park reservation system.
I agree. I can see that you're absolutely right. Even our Vermont Central Reservations agents refer to the 1st of August as Gold Rush Day, because that's when people can book for the July of the following year. There is always going to be, some speed and necessity. The monthly system's advantages, I know, caters a little bit more to the locals that are able to plan a little bit more short term, not looking out. The fear might have been that if we did the 11-month out, we're going to start seeing more and more reservations on the Waterbury Reservoir, people from out of state. We're not sure if that would occur or not. Again, these haven't been formalized. These decisions aren't yet being made. I will welcomely take all of this input back to my superiors. The 1 month at a time, the current month at a time system, if it does end, one of my fears is that it won't be graceful. If we do move to 11 months out, we're not sure when that's going to be. So we're definitely going to make sure that any changes will give as much public input or public notice as possible.
Another question was, and I'm not sure if this person was referring to the remote sites where they've never been legally there, or the Waterbury Center State Park, just a question as to what will the picnic tables return?
Will the picnic tables return? So I suspect that that might be regarding, there were picnic tables at some remote campsites. Those picnic tables were not provided by Vermont Forest Parks and Recreation. Several campsites on the Waterbury Reservoir, number 8, number 12, etc., had picnic tables that were stolen in the middle of the night by motorboaters who went over to Waterbury Center State Park. They put the picnic tables on their boats and brought them back to their remote campsites. We never provided them. For the first time this year, because we have the reservation system, and moreover, I now had 2 able-bodied young men to help, we brought those picnic tables back. If we can't provide a picnic table at every campsite, we're not going to provide any for now. There are conversations underway about modifying the design of picnic tables to make them a little bit more realistic for a backcountry use. Half picnic tables, for instance. No point in taking a full-size 8-seating picnic table to a campsite that has a max occupancy of 6 people. And of course, for us to service and maintain these types of tables out in the backcountry is not feasible. So the first step that we've recommended is placing picnic tables at the day use areas where we hope to reduce the strain of picnickers on our regular campsites. We also next year hope to phase in the same vein of amenities here, more of the metal fire rings at the remote campsites. I like that the campsites have been primitive thus far. There's just been a stone fire ring, but these metal fire rings that you might have seen, about the 30-inch diameter with a flop over metal grate, greatly reduce the risk of forest fires. I'd like to have those at each of our remote campsites even before we could take the next step of picnic tables. But yes, tables are being discussed. They will be back on the reservoir, but at the day use areas first is our current plan.
One other, it's actually more of a comment, Chad, than a question, is some folks that were out camping and camped numerous times and just sort of missed the instruction that they were supposed to text or call you to check in.
Yeah, we have that posted multiple places at each of the boat launches, twice at each campsite, one on the rule sign and again on the bathrooms if they were to visit that. When they make their initial reservations, it's part of the check-in procedures that they have to review. So I kind of grin that I know when people make these reservations, they're not looking for the details, but yep, they've been well informed that that is the policy. So again, in the future, yeah, we're going to possibly reach out to them in the day or days before they arrive with either an email or possibly a text message that's personally from our staff on the reservoir, not just an anonymous person in the central reservation system requesting that they do that, and just giving them a little bit of a heads up on what to expect when they get to the reservoir. So I do appreciate that, but no, it is well posted.
Yeah, someone else asked whether or not, and before I even ask the question, I know your answer will be that there are many ways that people would get around it, but question is whether or not the reservation site, Aspire, whatever, can limit the number of reservations one party can make each month.
Thank you. So there is a rule in Vermont state parks that no one party can stay at a single park for 30 days or more before they must move to another park. We have, yes, seen issues on the Waterbury Reservoir where the reservations were being booked. Basically, it's the same household, but under separate names, separate reservations. At least they are forced to check out. They do have to take all of their gear and leave the campsite. But yeah, that is something that I agree we do need to be able to better enforce. People will find those loopholes. They're going to book it under a pseudonym. They're going to book it under their sister's name. But as long as we can keep a closer eye on the type of vessel and type of gear, and then the actual people involved, they do still have to check out after each maximum stay of 7 days. But thank you for that. That is something we are going to have to address.
That looks like all the questions for right now, Chad.
One more.
One more.
Oh, one more?
Yep. I have 3 quick questions, Chad. They should, 2 of them will probably be 1 sentence or less. On the radio communications, I assume it's on channel 16.
I don't know the frequencies. There are 2 frequencies that have long been held aside just for forest parks and recreation. It's
okay.
it's UHF, and that's about the extent of my knowledge of that technology.
Okay. That'd be good to know, because for boaters, I think, because usually channel 16 is for like Coast Guard and stuff like that.
No, these are licensed and closed to the public. They're for forest parks and recreation use only.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Sorry.
Second question is, I know at usually Fish and Game accesses, you're not allowed to fish there. I know typically at all the accesses, there's heavy fishing there, and I support that. Is that okay? As Forest Parks and Recreation have a different standard than Fish and Wildlife?
I believe you might have misspoke. I think you meant swimming at the boat launches. Is that right?
Yes,
Okay,
sorry.
You said fishing at the boat launches. I want to make sure. So swimming at boat launches has long been a gray area. Swimming is prohibited at Agency of Natural Resources launches. We don't have Agency of Natural Resource launches. Ours are Forest Parks and Recreation. Sorry,
typically there's a lot of, like at Blush Hill, a lot of people swim there.
Yeah, they do indeed. Last year it was horrible when the swimming pool in Waterbury town, the village, was closed.
Right.
This year we're far fewer swimmers, but with the design they are swimming back to the rear. So that is something that we strongly discourage.
Okay.
This is graphic, but please never Google image search swimmer versus propeller. It's it's a horrible thing.
And the last question is, I don't know if you have statistics, probably not, but even if you have an anecdotal answer on the remote sites, are they occupied by paddlecraft or by power boats?
So thank you. That is a great question. I can give you an anecdotal observation only for now, because with the reservation system, they are not required to identify what they're coming in, just as if you were to make a reservation at Little River State Park. So every year the trends change a bit, so I'm reluctant to say, but this year it was majorly paddlecraft that were camping.
Okay.
And I know that can change easily, but yeah, this year was.
Yeah, I've noticed that myself. I've said this year it seemed to be very heavily toward paddlecraft, where in the past you saw more people with boats, because you saw more people having like little family vacations. They would bring half their home, out to the remote site.
Well, again, during the first come, first served days, the motorboaters will always win the race.
Okay, that's good. Thanks.
Yeah, there just were a couple questions about parking for remote campers. One was whether there's specific parking areas, such as Green River has designated one of the parking lots for campers only, and whether or not people have to have, I'm not sure what they mean by a non-residential overnight parking at access points. I don't know if you can address anything about parking for campers.
Yeah, overnight parking is an issue that I'm almost reluctant to discuss publicly, because we really don't want the general public to know where vulnerable vehicles are. The overnight parking is currently allowed at all of the boat launches, at the dam, at Blush Hill Boat Launch, at the Moscow Paddlers Access. Overnight parking at Waterbury Center State Park is occasionally allowed, but it is actually prohibited. There is a new overflow parking lot at the foot of the dam. The sign even says this is designated for remote campers. That is a less vulnerable location for break-ins or vandalization, just because it does have a bit more of a steady flow of traffic going in and out of the dam in Little River State Park. So to answer the question, no, there is only that one spot under the dam where specifically parking is allowed for remote camping.
Am I on?
Yeah.
So another question, Chad. Uh, I don't think that cameras are allowed on any of the state properties. Why is that?
I'm sure you're mistaken. Cameras are allowed and encouraged.
They are allowed?
Yes, yep.
Cameras are-
Yeah, it's a First Amendment protected activity. People can have a camera anywhere in public.
Talking
No, no,
trail
no.
cams?
No, I'm
Trail cams, are you talking?
Yeah. I'm
You're
thinking
talking about trail
cameras in-
cams?
Cameras in a tree said that would.
Trail cams.
Yeah, yes,
Security camera.
security camera.
Oh, game cameras. Is that what you mean? The
Mhm.
motion activated trail cameras of sorts.
Any camera that tracks a break-in in a parking lot or something like
Oh.
that.
Yeah, I'm not aware of their prohibition in Vermont state parks, but I'll look into it. I wouldn't be surprised if it's frowned upon just because people want to be more comfortable and not knowing they're under constant supervision if they're law-abiding recreation users. So I'll look into that. I don't know if cameras are prohibited. I don't know.
Okay, so
I
now,
think we're at the end
I,
of the
th- I
meeting.
think we're just about at the end of the meeting here. And, the questions that we had, they've sort of been answered, or we decided not to answer them for one reason or another. And is there any other business that anybody wants to bring up?
We're just gonna put out feelers to see whether or not anyone that's a reservoir user or fan would be interested in sometime during the winter to kind of get rid of some of the midwinter blues. Some sort of an online nature presentation, such as Green River Reservoir does every year. We have Bridget Butler coming in Friday night. We've had Eric Hansen. We've had Tom Rogers. Just wondering if people are interested, if there's a topic they'd like to have a formal presentation, on a topic of interest of nature or any particular wildlife, anything they might be interested in. Just either send us an email or send us a comment on our Facebook page. And, I say it might be just something nice in January, February, when we're all, hunkered down in a blizzard to take a little view of something a little more optimistic.
Great.
Just let us know, because we're open to that idea.
So it's-
I'll be working.
You'll be freezing
Walt, we know you're.
on the single.
Okay, it's time to say
We
goodbye.
know you're goofing off all the time,
Yeah.
Walt.
Yeah.
So,
I am.
yeah, so listen, if we have no other. Is
Are you
there
gonna put the 5-minute PowerPoint on again, Francine? So
am.
people want to see the fishing bins and the Loon Nest, they can see them?
Yes.
I will
Okay.
do that, and I want to thank everybody for showing up. I know there were a few technology glitches. I apologize, it's my first
You
time.
did great,
learning
Francine.
how to use this system, so. I'm gonna set
You did
this up
great.
to run, and hopefully if somebody didn't get to attend the meeting, if they'd like, we did record it. So if there's interest, I'd be glad to send them the recording. So just if you know somebody who didn't make the meeting because of the technology, please let them know it's available. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.